Subscribe now. Like the video. Leave a comment if you can handle what comes next, because once you enter this story, there's no turning back. The prison gates didn't open with a sound. They swallowed people. At exactly 4:17 a.m., under a steel-gray sky, a convoy of unmarked vans rolled through the frozen plains of Orenburg Oblast. Snow drifted sideways in the wind, erasing tire tracks almost as soon as they appeared. At the end of the road stood a fortress of concrete and razor wire known officially as Penal Colony No. 6, but to those who knew its reputation, it had only one name: the Dolphin Prison. Inside those walls were men who would never leave. Terrorists, contract killers, serial offenders whose crimes were so severe the courts had erased the idea of freedom from their futures. Life sentences, permanent isolation, silence as punishment. That morning, something had gone wrong. When guards conducted the first head count in cell block D, they stopped at cell 214. The door was locked from the outside, sealed like every other cell. Surveillance cameras showed no unusual movement. No alarms had triggered overnight. Yet the inmate inside, Sergei Volkov, age 42, former organized crime enforcer, serving life without parole, was lying motionless on the concrete floor. At first glance, it looked like another death behind bars. It wouldn't have been the first. Men in Dolphin Prison broke quietly all the time. But when medical staff entered the cell, they froze. There were no visible injuries, no struggle, no signs of self-harm. And yet, Sergei Volkov was dead. By 6 a.m., the prison was in full lockdown. Cell doors remained sealed. Guards were ordered to stand motionless at their posts. No radio chatter unless authorized. The warden, Colonel Mikhail Orlov, arrived early, his expression unreadable as he studied the incident report. Volkov had been healthy. No known medical conditions. No recent disciplinary actions. No contact with other inmates. He had spoken to no one the day before. In Dolphin Prison, that was supposed to be impossible. The prison's design was brutal by intention. Inmates were escorted blindfolded. They never saw each other's faces. Exercise happened alone, in concrete yards the size of graves. Communication between cells was strictly controlled. Every movement was logged. Every sound monitored, which meant one terrifying possibility stood out. If Sergei Volkov didn't die naturally, then someone, or something, had reached him without being seen. By noon, Moscow was notified. The case was quietly transferred to the investigative committee, and within 24 hours, senior investigator Elena Morozova stepped through the prison gates. She had built her career unraveling cases others couldn't touch, official deaths that didn't add up, crimes buried under paperwork and silence. The moment she entered cell 214, she felt it. The air was wrong. The cell was clean. Too clean. Volkov's bedding was neatly folded. His meal tray from the night before sat untouched on the metal shelf. No overturned furniture. No marks on the walls. Morozova knelt beside the body, careful, methodical. Time of death was estimated between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. No external trauma. No signs of poisoning detected in the initial screening. What was he doing before lights out? She asked. A guard hesitated. He submitted a request. Morozova looked up. For what? An interview. That stopped her. Inmates here don't request interviews, she said. Not unless they want something. The request had been filed 3 days earlier. Volkov had claimed he possessed information related to an unsolved case from the early 2000s, something involving missing funds, dead intermediaries, and names that had never made it into official records. Names connected to people who were still alive. The request had been denied. That alone wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what Morozova discovered next. When she reviewed the surveillance footage from Volkov's corridor during the estimated time of death, she noticed a gap. 92 seconds. Just over a minute and a half where the camera feed glitched into static before resuming as if nothing had happened. The prison's IT chief insisted it was a routine system error. Dolphin Prison's infrastructure was old. Faults happened. Morozova didn't believe in coincidences. She requested logs from the internal control room, door sensors, guard movements, radio communications. One anomaly stood out. At 2:11 a.m., a secure internal door, one that separated staff-only corridors, had been unlocked. For 7 seconds. No guard had signed for it. No reason had been logged. 7 seconds was all it took. That evening, Morozova stood alone in the observation corridor, staring through reinforced glass at cell block D. The lights hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance, metal doors echoed shut. This wasn't just a death, she realized. It was a message, and whoever sent it had done so from inside the most secure prison in Russia. But when investigators finally accessed Volkov's sealed inmate file, documents that hadn't been opened in over a decade, they found something that shifted the case from suspicious to terrifying. Because Sergei Volkov wasn't just an inmate. He had once been a state asset. And according to one classified document buried at the bottom of the file, he was never supposed to survive long enough to talk. And when Morozova turned the page, she realized the next name on the list wasn't crossed out. It was still active. By the time Elena Morozova left the archives, night had already swallowed the prison. Dolphin Prison changed after dark. The fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete corridors. Every footstep echoed too loudly, as if the walls themselves were listening. Morozova had worked murder scenes before: alleys, apartments, forests, but nothing felt as oppressive as this place. Here, silence wasn't empty. It was enforced. The classified file on Sergei Volkov was thin, deliberately so. Most pages had been stripped out years earlier, replaced with blacked-out blocks and vague bureaucratic language. But the fragments that remained told a dangerous story. Volkov hadn't just been muscle for organized crime. In the late 1990s, he'd been quietly recruited by a covert state task force designed to infiltrate financial crime networks tied to government corruption. He transported money, arranged disappearances, and most chillingly identified people who knew too much. Then, in 2006, something broke. An operation collapsed. Funds vanished. 3 officials died in what were officially labeled accidents. Volkov was arrested weeks later and sentenced to life, his role reduced to that of a common killer. And now he was dead. Morozova traced her finger down the last intact page. A heading stood out in faded ink. Protocol, silence maintenance. It wasn't a law. It wasn't a regulation. It was an internal doctrine, an unspoken agreement that certain secrets would never surface, no matter the cost. She closed the file slowly. If Volkov had tried to talk, then his death wasn't about punishment. It was about prevention. The next morning, Morozova requested to interview the night staff. The warden resisted at first, citing security risks and protocol, but Moscow had authorized her full access. Reluctantly, the guards were lined up in a stark briefing room, their faces blank, their answers precise to the point of rehearsed. Nothing unusual. No unauthorized movement. No unexplained sounds. Except one. Guard Alexei Petrov, stationed near the staff-only corridor, hesitated when Morozova asked him to recount his shift. "I heard a door," he said carefully, "but not an alarm. Just a pressure release." "What time?" Morozova asked. "After 2. I checked the panel. Everything was green. Green meant normal. Green meant no record." Petrov's eyes flicked toward the observation camera in the corner of the room. Morozova noticed. "Did you report it?" she asked. He shook his head. There was no reason to. That was the problem. In Dolphin Prison, there was always a reason. Later that day, Morozova reviewed the camera glitch again, frame by frame. The static wasn't random. It had shape, pattern, almost like an overlay. Someone hadn't cut the feed. They'd replaced it. She requested help from Moscow's cyber forensics unit. The response came back faster than expected, and it wasn't reassuring. The footage had been looped using internal access credentials that belonged to someone with clearance above the warden himself, which narrowed the list to almost no one. That evening, Morozova received a message slipped under her office door. No envelope, no name, just a folded sheet of paper with 4 words written in block letters. "Stop digging. You're late." She stared at the message for a long time before folding it into her pocket. Threats were common in her line of work, but this one wasn't angry. It was informative. Someone knew exactly where she was in the investigation. She decided to test the walls. Morozova requested a review of all recent inmate requests, medical appeals, legal filings, interview petitions. If Volkov wasn't the only one trying to speak, the pattern might expose the hand behind it. The list was short. Too short. In the past 6 months, only 2 inmates had submitted interview requests related to historical cases. One was Volkov. The other was Ivan Belov, housed in cell block F, serving life for a series of contract killings tied to corporate privatization scandals in the early 2000s. Belov's request had been denied 2 weeks earlier. Morozova felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She ordered an immediate wellness check. The response came 10 minutes later. Belov was alive, but shaken. When Morozova finally stood outside cell F301, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The blindfold protocol had been followed, the escort precise, but Belov was already standing at the far end of the cell, facing the door, as if he knew she was coming. "I won't write it down," he said quietly, before she could speak. "I won't say it on record." Morozova kept her voice calm. "Say what?" Belov laughed softly, a sound with no humor in it. "That they're cleaning house." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Volkov wasn't supposed to die yet. He moved too fast. "Who is they?" Morozova asked. Belov shook his head. "You don't get names. You get functions." Before Morozova could press him further, the intercom crackled. The warden's voice cut in, sharp and final. Interview terminated. The guards were already moving. As Belov was escorted away, he turned back one last time. "They won't touch you here," he said. "Not yet." That night, the prison went into an unscheduled lockdown. No explanation was given. At 3:06 a.m., an internal fire alarm briefly activated in cell block F, then shut off on its own. When guards reached cell F301, Ivan Belov was lying on his bunk, alive but unconscious. On the wall above him, scratched deep into the concrete, was a single word: late. And this time, Morozova understood exactly who the message was for. The lockdown ended at dawn, but Dolphin Prison never truly woke up. Elena Morozova stood alone in the control corridor, staring through reinforced glass at cell block F. The word late had already been scrubbed from the concrete, replaced by fresh gray filler, as if erasing it could undo what it meant. But she knew better. In this place, nothing disappeared. It only went quiet. Ivan Belov survived the night. That alone was suspicious. His medical report claimed exhaustion, dehydration, stress-induced collapse. No toxins. No visible injuries. Clean. Too clean. Morozova had seen enough stage scenes to recognize when reality had been edited. Belov was transferred before she could speak to him again. No notice. No paperwork trail she could follow. Just an empty cell and a silence that felt intentional. Which meant time was gone. Morozova shifted tactics. If the prison wouldn't talk, the records would. She returned to the archives, this time bypassing official channels. Years of experience taught her which doors looked locked and which ones only wanted to appear that way. She found it buried under outdated classifications and defunct departments, a ledger of administrative relocations. Prisoners moved without explanation. Files sealed under national security statutes that no longer officially existed. Sergei Volkov's name appeared 3 times. Each entry marked with the same notation: S.P. Verified. Silence protocol. The realization hit hard. Volkov hadn't been silenced because he was dangerous. He'd been silenced because he was no longer useful. Because the system he once served had outlived him. Morozova traced the names connected to his final months. Guards, supervisors, medical staff. One name appeared more than once, always adjacent to unexplained approvals. Deputy Warden Viktor Malenkov. Malenkov had been careful. Too careful. He followed every rule on paper, signed every form with textbook precision. But he'd been present directly or indirectly at every point where the system bent just enough to break someone. That evening, Morozova requested a private meeting. Malenkov welcomed her into his office with practiced calm. The walls were bare, save for a faded insignia from a long-disbanded internal security unit. He offered tea. She declined. "You're chasing ghosts," he said gently. "Dolphin Prison isn't a place where truth survives." "That sounds like a confession," Morozova replied. Malenkov smiled thinly. "It's a warning." She laid the ledger on his desk, opened it to Volkov's final entry. "Sergei Volkov wasn't suicidal," she said. "He was preparing to talk." Belov confirmed it. Malenkov didn't flinch. "Belov talks too much," he said. "That's why he's still breathing." The words settled between them like a loaded weapon. "So you admit it," Morozova said quietly. "I acknowledge reality," Malenkov replied. "Some men built this country by doing unforgivable things. The mistake was letting them live long enough to regret it." Morozova leaned forward. "And who decides when regret becomes a liability?" Malenkov met her gaze. "Not me. Not you. The machine decides." She stood slowly, heart pounding. Then the machine made a mistake. Malenkov's smile faded. Did it? That night, Morozova prepared to leave Dolphin Prison. Her report was incomplete, her evidence circumstantial, but she had enough to trigger external review, enough to force eyes onto a system that preferred darkness. As she packed her files, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. You opened the wrong door. The power flickered. Just once. Long enough to remind her where she was. Morozova didn't wait for morning. She left under armed escort, the gates of Dolphin Prison closing behind her with a final, echoing thud. As the frozen landscape swallowed the road, she allowed herself one breath of relief. It didn't last. 3 weeks later, her report was returned. Rejected. Classified. Archived. The official conclusion stated that Sergei Volkov died by suicide. That no evidence of misconduct had been found. That Dolphin Prison operated within all legal frameworks. Malenkov remained in his position. Belov's location was listed as undisclosed. Morozova was reassigned. Life moved on, but silence has a way of cracking. Months later, a former clerk from the Justice Ministry leaked a fragment of an internal memo to an independent journalist. It referenced a defunct protocol, obsolete but still active in legacy cases. The memo ended with a single line: silence maintenance remains ongoing. The story never reached the courts. It never triggered arrests. But it spread. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like a rumor no one could fully erase. And deep inside Dolphin Prison, behind layers of concrete and steel, life sentences continued in total isolation. Men disappeared from records. Cells were cleaned. Walls repainted. The machine kept working. Somewhere in that silence, Sergei Volkov's truth still waited unfinished, unheard, and deliberately buried. They said the most dangerous prisoners were locked behind the strongest doors. But the real danger wasn't inside Dolphin Prison. It was the system that made sure no one ever truly escaped it. And if this story got under your skin, remember this: there are more doors like this one out there. You just haven't seen what's behind them yet.